Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 60th audio chat in the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, joined today by precious metals expert Kirk Elliott. My name is SG Anon. It's been a while since we've had Dr. Kirk on the show, and one of the major arenas of the unusual warfare operation that we're all living through worldwide is finance and business. We've seen transmutation of countries from essentially impoverished rump vassal states of the Washington, D.C. arm into, for the first time in hundreds of years, semi-self-sufficient or pseudo-self-sufficient nation states that are beginning to revalue themselves and work towards that common goal of de-dollarization. When we talk about de-dollarization, it's not a pleasant thing for the American and the NATO West base to hear because it directly involves an antagonistic disposition towards our own currency system and our own way of life. And yet it is our currency system and our central banking system that has enslaved not only us, but the entirety of the rest of the world. We're pressing forward in that mission. There are tremendous developments happening in recent days and really in recent weeks with regards to Saudi Arabia, the petrodollar, the Ukrainian conflict, Russia and North Korea, China, and the Japanese yen. And Dr. Kirk is well versed, I think, in a broad spectrum of topics. Dr. Kirk, thank you for taking the time to come back and join us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, SG. Happy late 4th of July, by the way.
Well, same to you, and I really appreciate the time. I know that we've attempted to get this together a couple of different times, and we really are in an independence war style conflict here in the United States. We're in a war for our right to say the things that we want to say. We're in a war for our right to believe and espouse and to proclaim and to move forward based on the things that we believe in, and really in often cases, I think, based on our spirituality and our faith base. No more is this true, of course, than in the world of finance as well, which has been a fundamental reshaping multiple different times just in the last 100 years alone. And we're living in remarkable times of rapid historic change in those arenas today. We talked a little bit prior to coming on about different arenas of interest. Do you care to give my audience a breakdown of the things that you've seen, say, in the last 2 to 4 weeks that you would say are very important for the worldwide system as we go forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking over the 4th, just a little bit more reflective, I suppose. We celebrate America's birth and our independence and the fight that we had to actually go through to gain our independence. What I was thinking about is it's an amazing mirror of what you just said, because it's not a one and done remembrance of our fight for freedom. It's like this is a long-term ongoing action verb. It's like, because I mean, we saw it on the debate. We saw it. Our freedoms are eroding. And if we ever stop the fight for our freedom, they'll go away before we know it. I mean, literally. And so in the financial world where I live and breathe, I mean, even just this morning, there was, let me see. It's banking by mob rule is the title of the headline that I was seeing. But Volksbank in Germany closes the AfD donation account. So the AfD is the most conservative party in Germany, and they were closed. So again, debanking the people that are speaking truth, debanking anything that has any conservative values. I mean, they're anti-immigration party in Germany, and they would think like we do pretty much, right? And so they're being shut down. No more donations, right? So now that whole political party in Germany has to rely on PayPal. I was like, okay, that's not going to last long, seriously. But we've seen this before with the Canadian truckers. But this isn't a new thing. This is this ongoing battle for our financial freedom, right? Because I remember back in the days of Lois Lerner, right, when she had all of the clergy in America scared half to death that they were going to lose their nonprofit status. And then I remember a couple of years ago, Family Research Council got debanked because of their pro-family stance. It's like this battle is just ongoing. But that's the social side of banking and finance, right? We look at the technical side of it, and there was an article, some research I was doing last week. Well, this is a big story, because if we take a little step back in history, you and I have talked multiple times about the banking crisis and what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse and First Republic and Signature Bank when they all went under into FDIC receivership in March of last year, and they put a Band-Aid on, right? They didn't fix the problem. The underlying problem is too much debt, a stinky economy under Biden's economic plan for America. Wages are coming down, unemployment is rising, people are taking withdrawals out of their banks rather than putting deposits in. And when they're undercapitalized from the jump, that's what causes banks to fail. So they kept things held together with stimulus money called the Bank Temp Funding Program, but that expired in March of this year. So now you've got this major problem with the FDIC. They only have 1.17% of all deposits covered right now. And without that funding program, because the government's kind of running out of money, they realize they can't just keep printing and bailing out banks, which they're going to go to bail-ins. We're going to have to bail out our own financial institutions, according to Janet Yellen. I mean, but again, that's not a new bill either. That was part of the Dodd-Frank bill under Obama that said bail-ins are going to be one of the ways, we've already authorized it, that we can bail out financial institutions after 2009, right? So now fast forward to today. So last week, JPMorgan Chase, Bank of America, Citi, and Goldman Sachs all got a nasty memo from the FDIC and from the Federal Reserve that said after 2009, all these banks had to put together orderly resolution plans on how they're going to make their depositors whole in case of a meltdown, right? So they all had to put these together. Well, those four, and we have to understand, these are not Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank size banks. These are the four largest financial institutions in North America. They're massive, right? So they said,
The cornerstones of the SWIFT system.
Yeah, the cornerstone of it, the actual foundation of SWIFT in not just in America, but probably throughout the world. I mean, they're massive banks. So they said, the Fed said, what you put together isn't going to cover what we need you to cover. So we need you to submit by 2025, which is only 6 months away, a new orderly resolution plan. But here's the kicker. It didn't have to do because of their commercial real estate losses or their residential real estate losses or their balance sheets in their books that have all kinds of unrealized losses, right? Which means when they sell the stuff, they're going to actually realize a massive loss. It has to do with their derivatives debt. So when you look at that and you consider derivatives are just highly leveraged debt, right? So, after 2009, for example, when the subprime meltdown and everything else, they started selling. Financial institutions started selling these financial instruments, putting them into a package, and then selling them off to somebody else, just highly leveraged debt. Well, now, if you look at the top two in this list, which would be JPMorgan Chase and Goldman Sachs, each of them have over $55 trillion worth of derivatives debt. Bank of America and Citi all have in the $20 to $30 trillion derivatives debt range. But put this into perspective. The entire national debt of America is $37.8 trillion, but that took from 1776 until now to accumulate, right? So two of these banks have substantially more than the entire national debt of America each. I don't care how magnificent of a resolution plan that complies with the US bankruptcy code that they put together, you're not going to be able to pay that off. Nobody can. So like we've talked about before, I think there's bank failures 2.0 that's right underneath our nose, literally right underneath our nose. And you hear the political comments like from the debate, oh, we're winning the war on inflation. And Jake Tapper, the moderator, with a straight face, nonetheless, like he was talking about science, said, inflation's only up 20% since Biden took office 3.5 years ago. It's like, what? And people actually believe that nonsense, right? So 20%, no. I saw this viral video last week of this guy, how, if you go shopping on Amazon and you put together a bunch of stuff and you can just press a button and say, do you want to reorder all of this, right? So he went back and looked, and it was like 35 things that he had purchased, groceries and whatever else, and the bill was like $150. Well, to repurchase everything that he had purchased over 3 years ago, it was now over $400. That's, to me, that's 185% increase, not 20, right? So the numbers we're getting out of DC are completely fabricated. And you know who else knows this, that the economy is not on solid footing? It's not just the FDIC telling these banks we've got a massive derivatives debt crisis and a debt bubble that's about to explode. So therefore, submit a new orderly resolution plan. Hedge fund managers, which are very smart financial people, right? They're managing billions of dollars of people's assets per account. And you know what they're doing? They are shorting and selling their shares at the fastest rate in 2 years. It's like, so I'm looking back, it's like, fastest rate, what was faster 2 years ago? It's like, oh, of course, it was COVID, right? So during the COVID meltdown, these hedge funds and everybody were selling shares at a very rapid clip because the economy stunk. But now this is as fast as we've been since then. And this is bad. That tells us that they don't believe, when they're looking at the balance sheets, when they're looking at income statements, when they're looking at how much people are spending, the expenses, the cost of inflation on people's lives, it doesn't look good. So here's where I start to take it from here is we've
If I
got
may,
now.
I want to bring something to the audience attention before we move to this next segment because you've said something that's really, really important, and I don't want to lose it in the fray. You just described the main financial arms of what essentially controls and manipulates the commodities and raw minerals markets. And then the other arm being the hedge funds, that which controls and manipulates essentially all critical national infrastructure in the United States, to include railroading, infrastructure, power, utility, telecom, water delivery, food, etc. You're describing a situation where the financial underpinning really of both of these arms is now falling away, and the arms are recognizing that across the torso with one another. Is that a correct summary?
Yeah, it's like all these puzzle pieces are starting to be put together, and it's not just one, right? It's not just domestic, economy going bad and people not spending money. And when companies don't have revenues, their prices come down, right? But now we're talking about the investment complex as a whole. We're talking about the banking world, where that should be people's safest money, right? And in their mind, that's their safest money. Like 5 years ago, when somebody were to say, hey, Kirk, I'm pulling out of the markets. I feel it's like overvalued, it's squirrely. I think there's a correction coming. I'm just going to sit in cash. Back then, my answer would have been great. It's a great place to put it. Just a very defensive posture. Just sit there, wait for the correction that you think is coming. And when it does, you allocate back in at lower prices, right? I mean, it's wise stewardship. But I can't say that that's the case anymore. I can't say that keeping money in the bank is the safest of all things, especially when banks are starting to fail, right? And you've got a debt crisis. And when interest rates continue to rise because of inflation, people are delinquent on their loans, and then they default on their loans. And now there's the income streams for banks are drying up. I mean, this is like the culmination of a perfect storm that we've been warning people about. It's not like this is new, although it's accelerating, right? So now what's making this, to me, the most accelerating spark that we have? It's the emergence of the BRICS nations really rising up. Because when you look back at March, when Saudi Arabia basically said, you know what, we're not going to take US dollars anymore in exchange for oil, we'll take other currencies, right? So it's like, well, man, that diminishes the demand for the US dollar. That was the only thing keeping the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, SG, because the petrodollar, which was been in existence since the early 1970s, that had built-in demand for our currency. So therefore, when Congress would meet and say, we have to raise the debt ceiling, we want to do this stimulus, we want to increase entitlements, any kind of spending, they just willy-nilly would do it because they knew they had built-in demand for the currency. But now that they don't, they're going to have to think twice about every time they have a spending bill, because it's going to have to come from tax revenue. And that's not there because the economy stinks. Sales tax revenues are down, income tax revenues are down, corporate taxes revenues are down. So therefore, what's next? Print money. That's the only other option. See, the inflationary pressures are going to continue, which is why I don't think we're going to get any significant rate decrease for quite some time. Now, we might get one dinky one, right before the election to try to save face for them, but it can't. It's probably going to be a one and done, and rates have to continue rising because inflation is still an ugly monster that hasn't been killed, right? So now what is up with the BRICS nations? I think that's so accelerative towards this is back in August of last year at the BRICS meeting, Putin said he was going to de-dollarize the world, right? And so smug comment, you take it from Putin, it's like, oh, he's just a blowhard. But yet it was said with such confidence. It's like, what does he know that we don't know, right? Well, then in January, they added United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Argentina and other oil producing nations. Boom, de-dollarize the world by getting rid of the petrodollar, right? So when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started that you had mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is when the BRICS nations, which has been around for a while, really married. China and Russia basically married each other, connected at the hip economically and politically. And now Russia doing some kind of arrangement with North Korea. It's like, this is not good, right? But when you look at what they did, because it all had to do with sanctions. And as I'm thinking, so the BRICS nations started because of economic sanctions. They wanted to put together a large trade bloc. So each individual company, if they got sanctions from the West or from anybody, it wouldn't be as damaging because they're this large collective of countries, kind of like the European Union, right? So now that's what started that. Well, at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Putin got an economic sanction on him, which was the nuclear of all economic sanctions from Biden, which says we're kicking you out of the SWIFT system. Well, Putin, being a little more savvy than Biden, went to China and said, hey, we got kicked out. This is bad news for us. And China said, no, it's not. We've got one called CIPS, CIPS. So a problem solved for Russia, right? So basically connected at the hip economically. But then 3 weeks ago, 300 more economic sanctions were placed on Russia by the Treasury Department here in America. And so this ticks off Putin even more. Every time there's an economic sanction, you tick him off more and more each and every time, right? So this time, I'm thinking economic sanctions are a normal, result of war. When somebody's at war with another person, it's like, okay, let's starve them out. Let's starve out their people. We're going to put economic sanctions on them. That's not abnormal. But what you have to understand is you need to know your audience. You need to read the room, Biden, because you're not dealing with the Dominican Republic that produces coconuts, pineapples, cigars, and sugarcane, right? You're dealing with somebody that produces aluminum and oil and gas and raw materials and is part of the BRICS nation. So now you're ticking off 50% of the world's population. Bad move. Well, another economic sanction just got placed, not necessarily on Russia this time, but on companies and financial institutions that do business with Russia about 5 days ago. So an unlikely suspect that got caught in the crosshairs on this one, to me, it's like I was shocked when I saw it, but the Bank of China. So the Bank of China's Russian division, which what do? They handle all of the currency exchange between the yuan and the ruble, the two largest BRICS trading partners. And they said, we're going to cease operations in Russia. We don't want our bank to be shut down by Western sanctions. So we're just going to stop doing business with Russia. So it's like, okay, now what's Russia going to do? Well, it'll create like these black and gray markets, and different financial intermediaries will rise up, and it's going to be ripe for fraud, ripe for all this stuff, and Putin's going to get even more upset, right? So you look at this, tensions are rising every single day, SG, every single day.
Can I
But
ask you a question, Dr. Kirk, really
mhm,
quickly on this particular issue? Because you just highlighted something that I think is important. We have this escalation of the temperature. We have this continual buildup of the pressure. And you said a moment ago that it's companies and financial institutions that do any sort of business, conduct any sort of financial relationship with companies and businesses that are based in the Russian Federation. And we know that that's going to affect obviously everything in the NATO West, pretty much everything I would think in North America that has any sort of cross-border relationship with Central and Northern Asia. But the Chinese component is what really surprised me here. And we know that Putin and Xi have been very close. So if I may, I want to veer off for a moment and then come back to our topic here. Do you think that this is the setup to essentially disconnect North American markets from the Asian trade sector?
I think so. I really do. So let's take another step back in history, because Putin has been thinking about this for a long time, like literally a long time. So in 2009, when we had the financial crisis in America, we started printing money like there was no tomorrow, zero interest rate policy. We were devaluing our currency. And Putin saw the death of the dollar then. And so what did he do? In 2014, after about 5 years of that, he put together the Eurasian Economic Union, the EAEU, which aims to create a new power center to rival the US and Europe, right?
The
So
same
that
year
was
of the Ukrainian coup.
so that was kind of put on hold a little bit because the US economy didn't completely collapse. Why? Because of stimulus money coming out of the wazoo, right? But it kept going and going and going until now, when the BRICS nations were solidified. Now Putin's grand dream of de-dollarizing the world can become a reality, right? And this Eurasian Economic Union was just, to me, the predecessor to BRICS, right? Because this was Europe, Asia, those central countries in Europe. Well, now you've got BRICS, so they don't need the EAEU anymore. They've got something that's even bigger. And with the countries that are lined up to be part of BRICS, ultimately it's going to encompass 75 to 80% of the world's population, right? So now here's where I think he doesn't have to work as hard as he wanted to de-dollarize the world. Why? Because Biden's doing it for him, right? So Biden's economy, it stinks. We've got lowering wages, we've got rising taxes, we've got inflationary pressures, rising interest rates, bank failures. Everybody's operating out of the state of fear. Putin's got to be sitting over there. It's like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. This is amazing, right? I want to de-dollarize the world, and Biden's doing a really good job at it without me trying to interfere, right? But when you've got the two of those, I'm not saying that they're acting in collusion with each other, but one advertently or inadvertently, Biden wanting to destroy the U.S. economy because he's a globalist and he wants this big grand vision. Putin just wanting it for himself, being the spokesperson and like the lead voice for the BRICS nations. The dollar is toast, SG. I mean, even if Trump were to come back tomorrow, no better economic president in the history of our country. I would say, in light of the economy that he was dealing with, he did even better job than Reagan, right? But there's been so much damage that's been done, so many bank failures, so much more debt, so much more derivatives debt, that it's going to take a while to unbury ourselves just to get back to zero, right? Even if he were to come back tomorrow, we still have some times of mayhem. Now, Trump has some good policies, I think, moving forward of, hey, let's eliminate the income tax and replace it with what the founding fathers envisioned for income for America, and that's tariffs on imports, right? That hurts the countries that are sending us stuff, and it'll actually impact us because then American goods arbitrarily become cheaper, right? Because we're making other stuff more expensive. The demand for US goods is going to go through the roof. Jobs always follow manufacturing. So I think there's a plan moving forward, but you look at where we are right now. Everything is working in this sad way, accelerating the de-dollarization of the world. When you've got banks and financial institutions and wars and rumors of wars and this geopolitical power shift from the West to the East that's happening. And here's the thing. Let's say that Trump became president tomorrow. What's he going to do? Is he going to go to China and say, you know what, that reserve currency that we used to have that Biden blew up, we want it back? Xi and Putin are going to say, you're not getting it back ever. And we're a big enough trade bloc, 50 to 70% of the world's population. We're never giving it up now, right? So here's where I think we're in a stage, a war cycle that's never good for economies, SG. This is never, ever good. And I think
Stagflation.
it's stagflation to the core. I mean, we thought the stagflation during the Carter years was bad. This is that on steroids. Because with rising interest rates there wasn't an awful lot of debt back then. Now we've got derivatives debt and massive amount of debt and $37 trillion worth of debt. I mean, we don't even have to go back when Reagan became president, right after Carter. Do you know what our national debt was? It's a rhetorical question because I'm going to answer it, but it wasn't even $1 trillion. It was like 900 billion was our national debt in 1980. So when you rose interest rates to sky high 18% levels to slow down inflation, then you had less than $1 trillion of national debt. Now we have 37.8 trillion. Now we've got financial institutions that each have over $55 trillion worth of derivatives debt. This debt is going to be the Achilles heel of the West, not just America, but I think of Western financial system and banking as we know it.
So I have one more question then before we start moving into, our closing segment and reminding Patriots of the steps that they can take out there.
Mhm.
And it concerns itself with Japan. We've been tracking a nearly 4-decade record low in the Japanese yen going on a number of weeks now. Very interesting pundits online are suggesting that the currency is entering essentially what amounts to the first stages of collapse.
Yeah.
Provided that that is the truth, and I believe there's a significant possibility of that, especially considering the visit of the former Japanese Prime Minister, excuse me, to Mar-a-Lago in late April of 2024, so just a couple of months back. I think it's possible that it is true, and if it is, what does that do to the North American base?
So you look at what Japan's doing, and the yen would have already collapsed if it weren't for intervention by the Bank of Japan. So last week, the Bank of Japan dumped $73 billion worth of US and European treasuries and gold. So they needed to actually do that to basically boost the yen. And we saw it boost just a little bit, but it's like at these all-time historical lows. I mean, it's collapsing. So without intervention by the Bank of Japan, it would already be done. Right. This brings up another kind of question. It's like, what are they selling to get assets to help bail out the yen? They're selling US and European treasuries and gold. All of them are pretty high. Gold is sky high right now. But here's the thing. Whenever you and I need money, let's say we need money, or any investor, it doesn't need to be us as the example. Any investor, if they need money, what are they going to do? They're going to look at their portfolio and they're going to sell off something that's at a high point so they can lock in profits. Or if you're an investor, you want to sell something before you see a collapse coming to lock in profits. I think Japan is seeing the same thing. They're getting rid of US and European treasuries before they come crashing down, because the flip side of that coin is, what didn't they sell? Sometimes the most important part of the book is the words that weren't written, right? So what they're not selling is Chinese treasuries. They're not selling any of the BRICS nations' treasuries. And I find this very peculiar, right? Because when you go back through history, and you're a historian and you love history like I do, the Japanese people and the Chinese people have kind of hated each other since the beginning of time, right? They've never really liked each other, but yet they're keeping their treasuries in light of differences that they don't like each other, because they see financial strength there.
Mutual
Right?
benefit.
Absolutely mutual benefit.
This is absolutely compelling, Dr. Kirk. And so I want to sort of segue and ask an obvious question, but for those out there that are seeing us maybe for the first time, or for the second time since our initial discussion way back towards the beginning of last year, you're involved in precious metals. You do the commodities market. That's essentially your wheelhouse and your exchange. Why is that such an area of focus and commitment to you? In other words, why are you convicted that involvement in some amount of tangible asset, whether it's precious metals or, some variation of, why are you convicted that that's able to withstand what this process is clearly going to bring, which is the eventual collapse of the North American and Western
Yeah.
European financial system?
That's a two-pronged answer. I mean, number one is look at it at the investment growth. Why does gold and silver go up? Because they're things in an inflationary environment. all things go up in price, whether it's groceries or cars or oil or gas or commodities, gold, silver, they go up, right? So what you're doing is you're hedging a collapsing currency. It just takes more of that junk currency to buy a valuable good and service. So therefore, the price is going up. I mean, as we record this, silver's up like 80 something cents this morning, right? It's up a lot. Gold's up over $30. So when you look at that, we're 15 weeks ago, just a little over 3 months ago, silver was $22 an ounce. It's now $31.50 in a little over 3 months. That's well over a 30% gain. Most people would say, I'll take 30% in a year, and that would be amazing. But what we're seeing that is in a little over 3 months, we're starting to see that. It's the acceleration, but it's bigger than that to me. To me, it's a mechanism owning physical. I'm not talking about paper, ETFs, mining shares, mutual funds, all that garbage. I'm talking about physical metals, 100-ounce bars of silver, 10-ounce bars of silver, 1-ounce rounds, gold bars or kilo bars of gold, right? So when you own the tangible asset, you get out of their digital system, you get out of the unified ledger, you get out of programmable money, which the World Economic Forum said is coming. And what's it going to be based on? Your digital social profile, your social credit score. It's like, you don't think that that's going to happen? Ask the truckers in Canada when they got debanked, right? Your social credit score is going to be the driving force that keeps you married to your money or divorced from it. Because if your ideology doesn't match up with theirs, well, then they'll cut you off from your money. So when you go into tangible assets, you're out of that digital system, you're out of that paper system into something that's tangible and real. And the other kind of fundamental pillars that keep gold and silver propped up is not just supply and demand. You know, we've got massive amounts of demand for silver on a manufacturing side, even though we've got the most sluggish economy in 50 years globally, because it's used in electronics, solar power, aerospace, defense department, missiles and torpedoes need it. Like your average, your big ICBMs have over 11,000 ounces of silver in each one of them, right? And it's like, and we're going into a war economy. So the demand is there. The supply at COMEX depositories is diminishing. It's like almost gone practically. So when you have low supply, high demand, prices go up, right? But then you've got these fundamental factors of the hearts and minds of people. Whenever the foundations around them start crumbling, they look for safety. And gold and silver, since the beginning of time, it's what kings and kingdoms would always fight over, right? Is like, we want gold. We want the gold. Why? Because it has value. And in an era of inflation and unsustainable debt and political mayhem and geopolitical conflict, there is a flight for safety happening that's outside of the realm of why people would look at something to invest. And so when you put all of that together, it just simply makes sense for this time in history.
Very powerful, and I think extremely compelling. For my last and closing question, and really sort of my final thought, I'm going to ask a question that I think is probably on the minds of a lot of patriots out there. When you and I first connected initially and were able to begin our relationship after our initial introductions, we connected on the phone, and I was asking you, what would you advise someone who had $350 and nothing more to put towards as far as silver, commodities, precious metals? What was a responsible action for that individual, that caricature, to take? Because at the time, I myself had $347 in a savings account, and that was essentially the extent of what I was able to put towards any type of investment protection for my family.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those patriots out there that are working on a very low budget, on a very squeezed period of time in history right now, albeit we acknowledge that it is for the greater benefit of all of us moving forward, sort of like temporary pain for long-term gain,
Mm-hmm.
what can they do working with those numbers?
Well, cost of shipping has gone up since then, right? So our minimum now is $500. It's not extreme, but we pay for the shipping. Whenever anybody takes delivery of something at home, we cover all of that. So you can't really go into gold with like $500 because it's, $2,300 an ounce, right? So if you had a very small amount and you're just getting started, just financial troubles, hardships throughout life, but you want to start protecting and preserving and growing and thriving. I had a client 10 years ago. That's all she had was $500. And it's like, man, it was like 100% of everything she had. But she just wanted to start. Well, so she did that. And then she saved up another 500, did that, saved up another 500 and did that. 10 years later, her portfolio looks really nice because it was just that systematic, do what you can do when you can do it and allocate into strength. And before you know it, your financial anxiety and fear about the economy and your retirement is going to start to melt away. So we can do everything from IRAs to personal storage at home to people who have large amounts outside of an IRA. Well, they can open up a personal storage account at the depository where I store mine. So there's so many options for everybody. It's like I can't use a cookie cutter approach because everybody's different, right? Are you close to retirement? Are you just out of college or just out of school? Do you need income? Do you need growth? What are you in right now? I mean, there's so many different questions that's why we don't have an e-commerce site. I would never have an e-commerce site because then people might get something that's unsuitable for them, right? So we like to have conversations and you just give us a call and we'll hear your needs, your concerns, your dreams, your goals, and we'll craft a strategy moving forward that fits into exactly what you want for you to start melting away that financial anxiety and give you peace of mind and be in the right place at the right time. At that point, we've all won.
Dr. Kirk, there's not many experts that I have as repeating guests on the audio chat series, but your heart for the people and your interest in what is truly best for them personally in an individualized situation, it sort of speaks for itself. Thank you very much for joining me again. God bless you. And for the Patriots out there, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. It's been a pleasure. I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.